where she sat down and said, in a soft voice, "Miss Weston is not here." "My good fairy queen," said Tom, "you have cleverly changed your voice. But I know you are Mrs. Fitzpatrick. Please tell me where I might find Sophia." The mask answered, "Do you think I would encourage my cousin in an affair which would end in her ruin? And did your fairy queen invite you here to speak about a rival?" Tom realized that for this lady to bring him to Sophia, he must please her, so he began to be more charming. The two walked and talked for some time. To Tom's surprise, the lady greeted everyone by name, even though they wore masks. "People of fashion," she explained, "know each other anywhere, and to them the masks are childish. You will see that they get bored quickly at this kind of party and leave early. I myself am bored, and I believe you are too. I will leave now, and I hope you will not follow me. Indeed, I won't know what to say if you do." From this, Tom realized that he should follow the lady, and he walked behind her carriage all the way to a house where the door opened to admit her and her follower. Once inside, Tom begged her to take off her mask, and when at last she did, he discovered not Mrs. Fitzpatrick, but Lady Bellaston. After that, they had a very ordinary conversation, which, as it lasted from 2 until 6 o'clock in the morning, I shall not bore you with. The lady then promised to look for Sophia, and they agreed to meet again in the evening. Tom returned to his lodgings. After a few hours' sleep, he called Partridge and showed him a banknote of £50, saying he could now repay his debt. Though Partridge was glad, he was also suspicious. As Tom was out all night, Partridge imagined his desperate master must have robbed someone. The reader must imagine the same, unless he suspects the generosity of Lady Bellaston. In fact, the money was from the lady. Though she did not give much to hospitals and churches, she did think that young men without a penny in their pockets needed her help. That evening, Mrs. Miller came home from a visit to her cousin. The cousin was expecting a baby. Her husband was out of work, her children were starving, and the youngest was very sick. When he heard this sad story, Tom took Mrs. Miller to one side and gave her his purse, asking her to spend as much as she needed to help these poor people. Mrs. Miller was amazed, cried, took £10, and said, "I already know one kind man in the world. Now I know another." Mrs. Miller then told Tom what Mr. Allworthy had done for her when her husband died. That evening, Tom met Lady Bellaston again. They had another long conversation, but as it was just as ordinary as the one the previous evening, I shall not give details. Tom grew more and more impatient to see Sophia, but if he mentioned her to Lady Bellaston, she became angry. He was in a very uncomfortable situation. As Lady Bellaston had grown violently fond of him, he was now one of the best-dressed men about town. He believed her when she said that Sophia was deliberately hiding from him, and he could not forget that if ever they did come together, her father would never forgive her. But even if he did not love Sophia, Tom could never love Lady Bellaston, as her generosity deserved. She was in the autumn of life, and though she still had roses in her cheeks, it was art, and not nature, that put them there. The next afternoon, while he was trying to decide what to do, a message came from Lady Bellaston. The friend's house where she had been meeting Tom was not available. They would have to meet at her own house at 7 exactly. Tom arrived at the house a little earlier than 7, and Lady Bellaston had not yet returned from dinner. He was waiting in the hall when the door opened, and in came no other than Sophia herself. Lady Bellaston had cleverly sent her to the theatre so she could be alone with Tom, but Sophia had not enjoyed the play and had left quite early. Sophia first went to look in a mirror. Behind her own lovely face, she suddenly saw Tom. Turning to him, she screamed, and he moved forward to catch her before she fainted. To describe their looks and thoughts at this moment is beyond my power. If you have ever been in love, you will feel in your own heart what passed in theirs. In the time they had alone, Tom returned Sophia's notebook and the banknote. Then he fell to his knees and apologized to her about what had happened in the inn at Upton. Sophia was very glad to hear that he had never seen Mrs. Waters again, but was angry that Tom had told people in the inn that he was escaping from Sophia's love. Tom, who was surprised at these words, was able to trace them back to Partridge, and swore more than once that he would put him to death as soon as he got home. Things were now going so well that Tom began to say some words that sounded like a proposal of marriage, when suddenly in came Lady Bellaston. "Miss Weston," she said, with admirable control. "I thought you were at the theatre." Sophia, who had no suspicions about Tom's reason for being in the house, explained why she had come home early. Then she said that the gentleman with her had returned her notebook. Both the ladies then thanked him, and Tom, playing a very complicated game, asked for a high reward. "It is, ladies, the honour of visiting you here again." "Do you know, Sophie, dear," said Lady Bellaston after Tom had left, "I had a horrible suspicion, when I first came into the room, that the young gentleman was Mr. Jones." "Indeed!" cried Sophia, laughing. "Oh, Sophie, Sophie," cried the lady, "I can see by your colour that you still have Mr. Jones in your thoughts." "On my honour, madam," said Sophia, "Mr. Jones is as unimportant to me as the gentleman who just left us." "Then I promise I will not mention his name again," said Lady Bellaston, and the two ladies went to bed, each feeling rather clever. Sophia lay awake all night, but Lady Bellaston did not. She was enjoying her secret meetings with Tom, and next day she saw a way to remove her young rival from the scene. Chapter 19. Tom proposes marriage. Sophia had another admirer, an English lord, who had met her more than once at Lady Bellaston's. He had noticed her at the theatre, and was disappointed when she left early. Next morning he called to say he hoped she was not unwell. He stayed for 2 hours, and in that time he fell in love. Lady Bellaston was pleased to see her noble friend paying so much attention to Sophia. She took him to one side and said, "Lord Fellamar, are you in love with my young cousin from the country?" "I believe I am, madam," said Lord Fellamar. "Will you tell her father that I wish to marry her?" "I will indeed," answered the lady, "and I am sure he will agree. But there is one problem. You have a rival." Lord Fellamar looked disappointed. "But," added the lady, "though she loves this rival, he is a beggar and a bastard. I believe you can solve this problem, but not by gentle methods." "What do you mean, my lady?" asked Lord Fellamar. "If you are willing to be bold, my lord, you could be married to my cousin within a week," said Lady Bellaston. Lady Bellaston and Lord Fellamar then made a plan. At 7 that evening, when Sophia was alone in her room, reading a tragic novel, the door suddenly opened, and in came Lord Fellamar. Sophia dropped her book, and Lord Fellamar made a low bow. "Madam," he said, "as you have my heart, you cannot be surprised by a visit from its owner." "Are you out of your senses, my lord?" answered Sophia. "I am, madam," cried Lord Fellamar, taking her hand. "You are my angel, and you must be mine." Sophia pulled her hand away and tried to leave, but Lord Fellamar caught her in his arms and said, "I cannot live without you, so I must make you mine." "I will scream," said Sophia, and she did. But Lady Bellaston had taken care to send the servants away. Suddenly, an enormous noise filled the house, and help came to poor Sophia in a very unexpected way. "Where is she?" cried the loud voice of Mr. Weston. "Where is my daughter? I know she's in this house." And the door flew open to let in Sophia's father and all his followers. I shall never be able to describe the situation that followed, unless the reader's imagination helps me. Sophia fell into a chair, pale, frightened, and full of relief. Lord Fellamar sat down near her, amazed, frightened, and ashamed. Mr. Weston's clothes were rather untidy. He was, in plain English, drunk. Lady Bellaston now entered the room. After an unsteady bow, Mr. Weston said, "Sophie, here is your cousin. In front of her, won't you tell me that you will marry one of the best young men in England?" "Sir," said Lord Fellamar, thinking Mr. Weston meant him, "I am the happy man who will marry your daughter." "You are a son of the devil!" shouted Weston. "She will not marry you in spite of your fine clothes. Come, madam!" And Mr. Weston rushed his daughter into a carriage and ordered it to drive to his lodgings. When her maid Honour tried to come too, he refused, saying, "No more escapes, Sophie. I will get you a better maid." Luckily, Honour knew where to find Tom, and she went straight to his lodgings to tell him what had happened. She had no idea how Mr. Weston had found Sophia or where he had taken her. In fact, Harriet Fitzpatrick had written to her aunt, Mrs. Weston, to tell her that Sophia was in London, staying with Lady Bellaston. As soon as she received the letter, Mrs. Weston told her brother where to find his lost sheep. He immediately sent word to Mr. Allworthy and Mr. Blifil, told his servants to get the horses ready, and set off for London, taking Mr. Supple, the priest, with him. Fortune seemed determined to be Tom's enemy. He now had two rivals, and once again he had lost his dear Sophia. Tom now tried to avoid Lady Bellaston, but letters from her were delivered every hour. When his friend Nightingale saw how worried Tom was, he wanted to help him. "Dear Tom," said Nightingale, "are you troubled by the Queen of the Fairies? Oh, please don't be angry with me for mentioning what the whole town knows. Are you in love with her?" Tom sighed and said, "No, my friend, but I owe so much to her that I don't know how to end our affair." "You are not the first young man she has captured like this," said Nightingale, "so you needn't worry about her reputation. But as you are a man of honour, let me tell you a way. Propose marriage to her." "Marriage?" cried Tom. "Yes, marriage," answered Nightingale. "She will refuse." Nightingale persuaded Tom that there was no danger that the lady would accept his proposal, so he wrote her a charming letter. He soon received a short answer. "Sir, I see your purpose. You wish me to put my whole fortune in your power. Do you imagine that I am a fool? If you come to my house again, I shall not be at home." "Well," said Nightingale, "you now have your freedom." Tom could not thank him enough. Chapter 20. A kidnapping is planned. Mr. Weston took Sophia to his lodgings in Piccadilly, and once again asked her to agree to marry Mr. Blifil. When she refused, he locked her in her room and put the key in his own pocket. He swore he would not let her out until she promised to marry Blifil. Lord Fellamar sent an apology to Mr. Weston and asked for permission to visit his daughter as a lover. The messenger took the opportunity to tell Mr. Weston about his lord's great position and fortune. To this Weston said, "Look, sir, my daughter's marriage is already arranged, but if it was not, I would never marry her to a lord. I hate all lords, and will have nothing to do with them." He then kicked the man out with shouts and curses. In her prison room above, Sophia also began to kick and shout. Her father immediately ran upstairs, unlocked the door, and found her pale and breathless. "Oh, my dear sir," she said, "I was so frightened by all that loud noise. What happened? Were you hurt?" "Just a quarrel about you, Sophie. All my misfortunes are about you. Come, do be a good girl. Blifil will be here in a day or two. Make me the happiest man in the world, and I will make you the happiest woman. You shall have the finest clothes in London, the finest jewels, and a carriage with 6 horses. I promised Allworthy to give you half of my property when you marry, and you shall have the other half when I die. You are my only joy on earth, my little Sophie." Mr. Weston had tears in his eyes, and so did Sophia. "Do you really wish me to be happy, dear father? Then let me marry nobody. Let me come home and be your Sophie again." "No, Sophie!" he cried in a voice like thunder. "You will marry Blifil. You will have him, even if you hang yourself the next morning." And he marched out of the room, leaving his poor, terrified daughter in a flood of tears. Mr. Weston had brought several servants to town with him, and among them was his favourite, the gamekeeper, Black George. Meals were taken regularly to Sophia's room, but she ate very little. So when Black George asked his master if he could tempt her with a little cooked chicken, Mr. Weston agreed. They went upstairs together. Mr. Weston unlocked the door, and Black George carried in her dinner. He told Sophia that the chicken was full of eggs, and left it on her table. Sophia was very fond of eggs, so when she was alone again, she opened the chicken. It was full of eggs. There was also a letter, which had not been put there by nature, but as the result of a lucky meeting in the street between Partridge and Black George that morning. Sophia immediately tore open the letter and read it. It told her that her Tom loved her, that his arms were ready to receive her if she wanted to escape, but that if she decided to make peace with her father by forgetting her lover, he would understand. Now a new noise came from downstairs. Mr. Weston was arguing loudly with his sister, who had just arrived. "How can you lock up your daughter?" cried Mrs. Weston. "Have I not often told you that women in a free country cannot be treated like this? We are as free as men. You must let me take my niece with me to my own lodgings. These rooms are not fit for a woman of quality." Mr. Weston finally agreed. He did not want his sister to change her will and leave her wealth to somebody else. From her aunt's lodgings, Sophia managed to send a reply to Tom's letter. He spent 3 hours reading and kissing it, for it told him she would never marry another man. It also said she had promised her aunt not to see or talk to him. When Blifil arrived in London, Mr. Weston took him straight to see Sophia. To their surprise, her aunt was a little cool. She told them it was not polite to come so early in the day, and sent them away until the afternoon. Actually, she had another reason for delaying Blifil's visit. She wanted to visit Lady Bellaston, and find out more about the lord who wanted to marry Sophia. What she heard about him from her cousin was very satisfactory indeed. Lady Bellaston now had every reason to hate Sophia, and she told Mrs. Weston a secret. "This will make you laugh," she said. "Would you believe that young Jones tried to make love to me? Look, here is a letter he wrote me." And she passed her Tom's letter with the proposal of marriage. "I am astonished," said Mrs. Weston. "Whatever did you do with this fellow?" "Whatever I did. I do not want him as a husband," laughed Lady Bellaston. "I tried that once, and once is enough for any reasonable woman. Please take the letter, if you think you can use it." When her cousin had left with the letter, Lady Bellaston received Lord Fellamar, who was still determined to win Sophia for himself. He told her about the way his messenger had been treated by Sophia's father. Lady Bellaston simply laughed. She told him the father was a country fellow, not worth worrying about. His sister, Mrs. Weston, would persuade him to accept the lord's proposal. The real problem was the young bastard whom Sophia loved. "Perhaps, my lord," she suggested, "you could find some way to remove him. Kidnap him, perhaps. Send him to sea. I could tell you where he lives, if you wish to know." Chapter 21. Mr. Weston Sings for Joy. It was now that fortune really deserted our hero. He received an unexpected invitation from Mrs. Fitzpatrick, who perhaps wanted to try what Lady Bellaston no longer wanted. By now Harriet thought herself safe from her husband, who had gone to look for her in Bath. But when she had written to tell Mrs. Weston where to look for Sophia, her aunt had told Mr. Fitzpatrick where to look for his wife. It was chance that brought Tom to Harriet Fitzpatrick's door just as her husband appeared on the scene. It was jealousy that persuaded Mr. Fitzpatrick that Tom had been making love to his wife, and it was temper that made him strike Tom on the head and pull out his sword.